Hey Vernon, thanks so much for joining us on Fuse Calls. So you started Project Osmosis about 20 years ago, I think you said. Can you give us some background and give us a summary of Project Osmosis?
Absolutely, yes. So Project Osmosis, it did. It started roughly 20 years ago. Um, it actually grew out of a organization called Organization of Black Designers, OBD. And with David Rice, it was some national organization that they did a conference locally, and it was, very encouraging. They talked a lot about, you know, sustainability when it comes to designers of color, and no designers of color really being on the radar and things like that. And so, um, a small band of Chicagoans, myself, Jeff Tremingham, Angela Williams, a few others. Uh, um, at the time, Afia Adams, she's since married, but um, we put together kind of a small group of just of interested individuals in kind of creating a nice design community in Chicago, of designers of color to kind of encourage one another. So as we started to do the work, or to network, we started to realize that our interest was really doing mentoring, and recognize that that was something that many of us uh, hadn't experienced, although that wasn't the case with me. I Osmosis for me is a payment forward from my mother. My mother wanted to be a designer, and in the '60s, that was unheard of for a woman in the Deep South to want to do design. So her brothers and sisters, or her sisters who wanted to be nurses and doctors, migrated north with the Great Migration, but she was left behind. She stayed, and but instead she went and brought these books called the famous art course books by Norman Rockwell, and she gave me those books when I was 5 years old. And so I literally was exposed to design as a design career choice. And I have those books. I'll show them to you maybe another time there at my office. But um, so these books are like huge, and they have like Norman Rockwell drawings in them. They have like how to sketch, how to draw. And so when she gave me those books, it put me on this path. And she basically said, when she saw me sketching and doodling, she said, "Oh, that my baby can do anything he wants." And she put him on a refrigerator, and and that let me know, and it built a confidence, even as a black man coming up in design. Even when I was told, this isn't something that you can do, or this isn't something that black people did. I was like, you can't tell me that, because my mama said I can be a designer. And my mama affectionately called her baby girl, and so I had baby girl's reinforcement. My father worked with his hands, and so I had this very powerful influence, and I recognize how important that is. And so therein lies, the creation of Osmosis. Myself, Eric Bailey, Lisa Moran, Marty Parham, Raquel Stallworth, a band of us got together and started actually brainstorming and actually designing a concept for where we all felt that design should be seamless, and everybody. One of my things that I say is we all have the human right to be creative. And so is what really built sort of this osmosis mission. And we recognized, AIJ, for example, recognizes the statistics that there aren't many African American designers, at least on radar, that practice and that do this work. And so we were inspired by that, and I recognized, you bring about change one person at a time, and investing and showing a personal interest. And so that's what osmosis does. Its meaning is design, or it's a scientific term that means creative fluids seamlessly going from one end of the spectrum to the other. Well, we view it as creative fluids, or creative juice, going from one end of the spectrum to the other. And so we felt if we form this sort of symbiont circle, or this kind of tri-circle with this, then it would be all inclusive. And so when you look at the logo, Mark, that's what you see, these kind of the three rings: community, dream, self-expression, and community is what those circles represent. And so that's, this 20, so it took us on a 20-year journey And in that 20 years, we've worked with, all kinds of individuals and helped individuals realize their dreams of design. I, in that process, have honored my mother and my father and my tribe. I do have a Native background too, so we speak that way when we say honoring our tribe. And so I've been able to do that with the help and being a citizen. But for me, this has just been a labor of love. So it hasn't been work for me. And I didn't realize it was 20 years until somebody said, you know how long you've been doing this? And so that's sort of that was my summary about osmosis. So I hope that answers question one. I will maybe bring those books, and at another time I can show them to you for the podcast, because I really want people to see.
I'm always open. I'm always open to having a second go at it. I'm already doing second interviews. So yeah, I'm game if you are. And
I'll bring those with me. I definitely want people in the podcast to see, look, this is what it looks like,
Yeah.
And that's how I got on this journey.
You can also send me some images, and when we publish this, I can fit them into the document we publish. Some people
absolutely. Yeah, I'll send you like the Osmosis logo, and then I'll send you a few other items that'll be in the deck as we talk. I'll send you a picture of baby girl and again, those books and things. So when you see it, you'll see why, how important it is in my narrative, in my story. I'm a little not used to, I've been so just busy doing the work, and now, it's become a stage where, by design inclusion being a very powerful thing and thing of interest, now people are much more interested in. It's what we've worked for all this time, but you know how you can work for something and hope that it happens. Then one day you go, oh, it's actually happening. So, so I just feel honored and privileged to be a part of this whole movement. So that's my answer to question one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's I love to hear that your life and your work is integrated, and that that comes from your childhood, and that's such a tremendous foundation. And I went to art school in Syracuse, and I remember one of my art history teachers saying that if statistically, if a child continues to draw, all children draw, all children pick up crayons and draw and color. But if a child continues after age 13, that kid becomes an artist.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, most people by age 13 stop drawing altogether.
Yes.
So I think, and that was my story. I kept drawing and coloring and painting from childhood on. Yeah. So I can identify with that deep connection to what you're doing. And I'm very fortunate. I have a job rooted in design, but that comes from, just me, just how I grew up.
Yes.
So interesting. I'm gonna flip the game here on you with my next question.
Sure.
Fuse, this conference, our target market is the C-suite. We're talking about CEOs, design, brand directors, big companies like Target and Facebook. Our theme this year is a new unity: brand, design, and the business. Can you talk about how Project Osmosis is preparing young designers for tomorrow's business world? Do you guys think about that? I know a lot of your work is therapeutic, and or maybe it's not. You can correct. I got the impression, you're working with kids and you're working with youth, and maybe some of these kids. I mean, this is kind of a refuge. I don't know, but can you speak to how much of what you do is geared towards just kind of creating, making that outlet available for these kids versus preparing them for a future in a professional kind of a capacity?
Yeah, I'll start with this. It's a little bit of both, but you have to start at the base and the foundation. And you kind of alluded earlier to having that exposure or having the internal permission to design and create in so many areas, especially low income bracket areas are areas that design is not considered a viable resource, partly because people don't talk about it. People aren't, seeing's believing. So people don't see individuals that look like them who do it, and so for the first thing we do is really talk about what design is, and that design is a problem solving tool. And we get people, young people especially, to look at their own neighborhoods and communities. For example, how can I build a better bridge? How can I make a walker for my mom who's ill? To actually look at branding and addressing the crisis in their own communities. One big program we did for Design Explorers last year in partnership with After School Matters was we had 21 young men in their inner city who deal with the issues of violence, especially here in Chicago. And first, the thing we did was we asked them, well, talk about yourself and your connection or disconnection to this, and how do you feel about it? And give us your personal thoughts about this crisis. And as they did that, one of the things we did, and the actual project came out of this, is we said, well, in the design field, we call what you guys are discussing, they were talking about how people don't, view them as important. People don't do this, or they view whenever they walk in the room that they're going to be violent or try to shoot up the place or whatever it is. And so what we said is, in the brand world, we call it that you're being misbranded. So we instead, we want you all to reposition your brand. Look at yourself and reposition. Let the world know what you actually are and what's in you and these things. And so they came up with these amazing designs, some of which I'm going to show, these amazing brands of themselves, and then to speak about themselves. So what it does is it turns around, because it's dream self-expression community. So it's about building character and self-esteem that's already there, but they just haven't been told that they matter. And so by starting at that core, then, and it's based on, this is going to sound corny and generic, but it's based on love. So if you have that love for another person and that personal interest in them, then it puts them on that journey. And it lets them know, I have this right to be creative, and it's okay to express myself, and my ideas matter just like any CEOs or any top business person, executive. And then, I'm on both sides of the coin. I have my own design firm. We call ourselves Art on the Loose Creative Therapists. But again, that confidence that I've been given comes from knowing, one, I had to go through that myself, of being misbranded as a man of color. And so I can relate to them and connect very quickly. But also when they see me, they go, well, he's Black and he's doing this, and so I recognize the responsibility that comes with that too. But I also let them know that they are their own unique self, and to invest in that, invest in their own brand, invest in, and what that does is, invest in their sisters in the community. One of the things we do in the program with our young brothers, because now in our Explorers classes, it's co-ed, it's young men and young women.
Yeah.
We talk to the young men about being gentlemen and being respectful, and not being so quick to just run through the door. Open the door for your sister, or do something to. So it teaches that we all matter. It teaches them that they have their own creative background and culture. One of the things that I've learned in this business is that everybody has a creative culture and a brand. It's a matter of if you've been allowed to discover it. So I think with the Fuse unity, a new unity, I think the new unity to me is recognizing that as these CEOs and corporate organizations, you can't wait until, you need a person of color in your company, and you haven't invested in that. You have to invest, at birth. You have to invest by letting individuals know that they matter creatively, and what they'll be willing to do is share their creativity with you. And so I think in companies, it's an interchange of creative, again, that osmosis, those three circles of sharing our visions, sharing the problem solving. You know, when we're hired to work for a company, they bring us in because we have these ideas and these great ideas. One of the things we talk to with our young people, they'll go to me and you. We both got in this profession, being able to draw too, and being able to. So that was sort of a launching pad. One of the things we teach and talk with our young people about, because many of them will see us draw. I may draw something and the young person goes, well, I don't know how to draw, so I can't do this. And I say, no, your ideas is really what's important. You can get somebody to do a sketch for you. You know, I said, and so we teach them. I said, don't you know that's what a lot of these companies do? You know, they have people who have ideation. They have these amazing ideas and they figure out ways to turn these things into reality. So your challenge is to not just be dictated to on what you are and how you think, but to think yourself and to share that thinking process with others. And then to learn how to value other cultures as much as you should value your own. So that's what makes, to me, a well-rounded creative. You're not just stuck in your own communal box. You know, I always talk with, and I've talked with AIJ about this too in the past when I've done a presentation. And I mentioned that, you know, I don't like the word diversity in many cases because companies use it as a placeholder word. You know, I remember seeing the brochures growing up.
I think it's very well intended, and then it can start to create unintended challenges.
Exactly,
right?
and unintended divides too. You know, so you know, I know when people are using the word, it's with good intention, but you know, for me personally, I didn't like it because I grew up with when somebody says, well, you know, we have to diversify this area. It's almost like they're telling on themselves, you know. It's like so my definition growing up of diversity is, you know, well, we got to include an Asian person, a white person, a Latino person, put it, and it's on a brochure cover. And I saw so many publications like that.
Well, like Benetton, remember the
exactly
colors of Benetton? That was
exactly. So I said, to me, you know, I like the word inclusion or inclusive more because design should be a community thing, community based. So, for example, in my community where I live, if there's a white person or an Asian person or me or what I like to cook and do, and I invite them over for dinner, you know, then we're becoming a community. Or when I see their kids getting on the bus or not getting on the bus and going somewhere else, I go, excuse me, the youngster's going the wrong way. Where now there's a personal interest where the community feels included. And so I think that's, in a nutshell, from a corporate standpoint, to the challenge that's faced is making individuals, you know, because corporations are huge, they're big, they're Fortune 100, 500 companies. How do you allow the culture to be inclusive and turn the word diversity into a term that really has depth and not a word that means that you're filling a quota in your company. So that's my thoughts on that.
That's a lot to think about there. You know, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm also very fortunate because I'm a musician. I play piano, and I fell in love with jazz music, but not until like in my college to 20s. You know, it's so funny because there's such a rich, deep history with African American history and music. I mean, you could go all the way back to the Negro spirituals to, you know, Scott Joplin, ragtime, to Louis Armstrong, and there's this, and this is like, I mean, that tells that real, like, the jazz history tells that story. I mean, there is no denying African American history. And when you're talking about jazz history, I'm just curious why. I'm just thinking about this now. Why did that not happen with visual arts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think a few things occurred from my vantage point. One, when you look at culture and the culture divide of us being, you know, basically pulled from our land, I mean, from the Africa continent to slavery and all over the country. When you think about how people of color were dropped off in these different, in the selling of the seven seas and bondage of slavery, individuals were basically pulled away from their culture, right? And then if you are like me and have some ancestral native culture here in the U.S. Basically the same thing happened, but it was reversed. People came in, and basically said and took the culture away. So there's a huge cultural disconnect. But when you look at kind of, for lack of a better term, Euro society and everything, that remained intact, all these years, so they can trace things back so easily. Right. So that to me has influenced design today. When you think about, Bauhaus design and I mean, all those things. And I actually lecture on that at UIC. I lecture on design inclusion. So I talk about how, you have William Morrison and all these, Bauhaus and all these things that have been around forever in schools and things have been built on those things, been named after them, but if you culturally have a divide where your own culture isn't present, it's not part of the curriculum. And so, when you look at what designers and color patterns and things like that, of African descent, of Native descent, of Latino descent, those things aren't in the schools as part of the curriculum base. It's like, well, you're going to learn Times Roman. You're going to learn, Helvetica, and you're going to learn. Now, don't get me wrong; those things are beautiful, and I love Scandinavian design. And look, I shopped at IKEA for years, right? So, but that's only one culture. That's only one piece.
Well, I mean, as I'm listening to you talk, and I'm thinking about this kind of interesting, comparison between the visual history versus the music history. Mm-hmm. With art, it's very, elitist or academic. You put it in a museum, and this is like wealthy people. This is what the Bauhaus was rebelling against, but it became the institution it was rebelling against. Right?
It sure did.
And the bourgeois, like, ornate, decorative, and the Bauhaus was like, this. Yeah. This is crap. And I read this whole thing about From Bauhaus to Your House, Tom Wolfe. It's a great book. I don't know if you've read this, but he lampoons the Bauhaus, and he goes into the history all the way into the creation of projects here in the States, which are derivative from Bauhaus thinking. These were supposed to be for everyday, working man kinds of living spaces. Mm-hmm. It became disastrous here in the States. But I think because there was this cultural divide that was never really acknowledged. But if you think about music, there's no denying, like Louis Armstrong standing up on stage in front of, it's just magic. You can't deny it. You can't. And maybe that's.
Yeah, that's dead on. I think by it being transferred through song and singing, they even with slaves in the fields, they could sing. That's how they got through the day. Right?
And the emotion is there.
The emotion's there. But who were allowed, as they're picking cotton, you don't have time to sit down and do a sketch or to talk about your culture and how. So those things were really culturally taken away. And what has happened to me over the course of time is it's always been there. So, when you see colors and fabrics and things, and quite frankly, many have invested in those things and seen that, okay, there's dollars connected to this, but by people of the Africa descent not having the connect to the resources to make it viable for themselves, in many cases lost out where, quite frankly, in many areas, they were copied, but not promoted. They were their works, their styles, the design, Africa patterns and things like that. They were being mimicked and used, yet the people who actually were behind it never received credit for it. So that has spiraled over the years. I think culturally. So to the
It's
point
probably
where
a lot easier to steal that stuff as
yeah,
well,
yeah,
as opposed
exactly.
to music,
Yeah,
especially when you started recording music.
yeah, yeah. And then there was no Afrocentric patterns and things like that legally copywritten protected because,
Right.
you know, one, the people who created them didn't have the means to do that, and two, uh, because because the self-esteem is low, they don't even realize that how valuable those things are because they don't see the cultural legacy and the full connect and the power. What's happened today with things like Black Panther and Afrofuturism and all these iconic things, then people of color recognizing, wait a minute, you know, I have this whole rich history, this whole culture, you know, a lot of the exhibit design work I do professionally is connected to this whole theme. So my life is all about this theme. But we designed in Kingston, Jamaica, the Marcus Garvey Interactive Museum, and there's a whole section on self-identity. People in Jamaica, you know, they many bleach their skin to get the high-paying jobs, you know, and so it's caused this cancer epidemic and all these problems. But people are, again, it's a cultural divide of not seeing their own value in their own current skin color, the God-given skin that you're in, the Yahweh given, you know, the Jehovah given skin that you're in is so important to know and be comfortable in that. But you also have to know how to defend yourself and to defend your culture. But if you don't know that you have one to begin with, then you
Right.
have nothing to defend. And so I think, and that's what I mean by being inclusive, where to me, I hope one day to see where design is truly inclusive in the full sense, where there's no hierarchy. And well, this, you know, European Bauhaus, this is considered elite and this is considered not. You know, I think that the value of each one is important. And I think, for example, over in Asia and in Asian culture, I think that that's, um, you know, much more of being acknowledged and looking at the legacy of other designers and artists. And so I think that's been my life's mission. Again, with projects and work that we do, we designed the Brownsville Children's Museum here in Chicago. It's the only African American children's museum that address Africa history for kids,
Right.
right? And so I'm recognizing that design, as far as being culturally recognized, is still very new for our community. Whereas there are other communities that have been like Asia, like Europe, like, you know, German, that have been connected to it for centuries.
Yeah.
So we're trying to reconnect those things, and we're finding just a beautiful, um, beautiful colors, tapestry, beautiful things that people have used and picked up. But we're kind of reclaiming uh, those things, and then, but when not reclaiming them in a selfish sense, but reclaiming them from a cultural sense, knowing that, oh, this is where I'm from. This is
Yeah. I
what
mean,
represents me.
it's that old saying: if you don't know where you came from, you don't know who you are. You don't know where you're going. So
Exactly.
if there's this kind of historical block and you don't know you're part of this heritage,
Exactly.
then
Yeah.
it's
No
a
point of reference. Yeah.
right. So I think that's like when I started really getting into music, I learned that history there. There's a lineage. You know,
Yeah.
I could go back from, you know, today, rap music, hip hop, all that, American Idol, all the way back to, you know, the slaves singing on the plant. There's a history there. It's undeniable. I learned that history.
Yes.
So
Yes.
interesting. So
Mhm.
it really gives it meaning and value, and I can relate to that. I know what, you know. I know where I came. My parents came from Ireland and Spain, but
Mhm.
recently,
Mhm.
so they were immigrant. But I'm American now. Now I'm part of this history, so I've inherited it as well. But
Yes, 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 yes. Agreed. And actually, I'm gonna grab two books. They're right over here. Can you give me 2 seconds to grab them?
go
Yeah.
for it.
Okay. unfortunately, I don't see the other, but I wanted to share. So this is an example of one of the books. This is actually a book that we designed, and myself and Marty Parham did the printing on the book. But this book is called A Life's Design, and it's on Leroy Wimbush, who was the first designer of color that we know of, who had a design firm here in Chicago. He was a mentor of mine, so it tells his whole life story. But he spent, you're a jazz musician. I mean, you know, you're a musician.
Yeah.
He was a musician too. And he got his start designing posters. He didn't go to school. He was self-taught designing posters for the Regal Theater. So he met people like, you know, Lena Horne, Nat King Cole, Sarah Vaughan.
Yeah.
You know, we're actually going to have this book at the conference, but I showed you this, you know, here's some pictures, him with Cab Calloway. That's Leroy right there.
That's so cool. Is
Yeah.
Leroy still with us?
No, he has since passed. He passed 10 years ago. And also the other book, and I'll show it to you later when I show you the other books and everything of Chuck Harrison, which is another book that we Jeff Trimmingham, that we worked on. And these books, the reason I showed that book was that book is a direct result of that disconnect reconnecting, where I met him when I came to Chicago, and I was on this quest trying to find someone that looked like me that practiced this. It was very lonely, you know, going to like meetings or going to an AIJ event or American Center for Design, what it was previously called, and you being the only person of color in the room, or you being like, wow, you know, I don't know if I belong here, you know. And so to then meet someone like this who went through all that, and not only, he actually designed window display malls during the Depression to get people to bring their monies back to the banks. They started to hire Mr. Wimbush and his company, Wimbush and Associates, to start designing, you know, visual spec. So then Michigan Avenue picked that up. You know, a lot of the malls and things picked it up. And before you know it, you have Goldblatt's and you have these places. And then Goldblatt's hired him to be an art director. So he was over all these people, you know, and he was over, you know, white design. He was over, you know, and so that was unheard of. And so he was a Renaissance man. He broke all these barriers.
Wow.
And the back of his book, we put on there, I fill space with imagination. That's one of the first things he told us, you know.
Wow.
And he would always tell us, look, I don't want to just be known as a good Black designer. I want to be just known as a good designer, period.
Yeah.
And so that book we'll actually have at the conference, along with Chuck Harrison's book. And both these books are very similarly titled, Design for Life and A Life's Design. And so Osmosis had a hand in basically creating these books because we recognize, for a curriculum standpoint, that there is nothing for our young people to look at and to be inspired by. Where you can look at a Frank Lloyd Wright and you can read about William Morris, you can read about, you know, all these other designers, and with all and I have tremendous respect for their craft and their skill, but I also recognize there was this undercurrent for me saying, well, maybe I'm not supposed to do this because I don't read about anybody that looks like, you know, me that practices this. So I think for companies, it's important to recognize that there was you know, you can't ignore that this divide has existed. And I think by having programs and things and working with organizations like Project Osmosis, you know, to help us to create this nurturing environment and where people can reconnect is critical for their own success, you know, because then you get individuals who are full rounded and who are very open to sharing their ideas and concepts and recognize the value of being inclusive in the work that they do.
Well, I think sometimes it's really hard when you're thinking about corporations and cultural change. You know, I've worked at this company for a very long time, and there's corporate politics, and, you know, everything comes to the bottom line, and meaning, you know, what's our revenue look like? Are we making money? And so when you introduce some of these complex cultural issues, I don't even think there's malintent. I think people are like, we can't, this is not, let's
Yeah.
keep our focus, people. Like,
Yeah.
we have to make money. We can't talk about these social issues, right?
Exactly. Which is, and we totally, and I completely get that too, which is why, it's important, because you have individuals within the company who may have these interests and thoughts. Well, making it accessible to them. Well, okay, just putting it on your board of activities.
Right.
Project Osmosis is doing an Express Yourself portrait program.
Right.
As professionals, maybe we can volunteer, some of us, and go out to, and being kind of in the field, so to speak, a little bit, where you're not just, so in the corporate activities that you don't even look at the consumers that you're serving, because these corporations are serving consumer groups.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's all a part of understanding the consumer, as well as the own future of your organizations. Many companies, I know we talk about Payless and different, companies, they don't keep up with the new medium and the new mindset, or they become fixed in their mindset. And when you become fixed in your mindset, you're not growing. You're just basically stuck on your ideas and your tradition and what happens is, and that's happened to many corporations, that they look up and they've been passed by the Walmarts and by the this and the that, So I think it's important. And in a lot of these organizations that have grown, they've recognized, okay, we have to be global. We have to look at design Target to me is a great example of that, where design matters to them. And you can tell that they really think a lot about just being inclusive and making sure in their visuals, it's not just one group, and and there are results in that. But I also think that it's important for an organization like that to invest in creative programs to stay creative and stay relevant. So it's both.
I think, I've seen it firsthand. I think it's very tricky stuff, it's very tricky stuff, and we could probably talk for years about it.
Yes, we could. Yes.
I'll get on to some more questions. So after 20 years, which I guess is the shock to you, first of all, can you share some, I'm sure there's products of Project Osmosis that have gone on and become professional design folks. Can you talk a little bit about some of these folks, and what do you find to be most inspirational about Project Osmosis?
That's a great question. Yeah, the most inspirational thing is when you see how it can change lives. It can change the actual pattern. It can change the way a person, their trajectory of where they were going in one direction, and then because of this creative introduction, they go in a completely different direction. One amazing person is one of the first individuals that we, through Osmosis, connected with, is my business partner, one of my business partners today, Keith Purvis, who now is working on a film about Blacks in advertising called Genius of a Different Hue. And he has gone on, it has his own company, Turquoise Media, and the Junction Films. Amazing talent. When I met him, a friend told me, a friend of a friend, they knew I was doing this kind of work, and they said, we know a young man who lives over here off Union, and, he draws, but, he might be kind of getting into some trouble, you might want to, you got a moment, check. So I was with my brother, Reggie, and we were out, doing our own ministry, and we both just decided, hey, I said, you got a minute, let's stop by and check on this guy. I just want to see what he does. And I went by and I met him. When I first met him, he was quiet. He had that hard thing that a lot of brothers have, which I've had too. I understand it. So he had that. And I said, hey, what's your name? He's Keith. And I said, I hear you draw. And he says, yeah, I do a little bit. And I said, well, show me a picture. And he says, well, this is my room. And they're all, so I went to him with, I met his parents, and I went up to his, I met his dad. I knew his mom already.
Mhm.
But I went up to his room, and it was this attic, and it was just covered with art all over the walls.
Oh, wow.
And I said, wow. And I mean, talk about gifted. And I said,
Right.
man. So I said, at the time I was living in at the time I was living in a 2-flat apartment, right? And I basically said, me and my family, and I said, hey, why don't you just stop by, and I can, you know, and and I introduced them to Cheryl. I introduced to my family and friends, and they were like, wow, this guy is really talented. I said, and at the time, I was using an Adobe product, and I said, I have to go to a design meeting, a meeting with a client, but when I, here's a, work on this if you want to play around with this program, and I'll come back and, maybe we can talk. I came back about 3 hours later. He knew Adobe Illustrator better than I did,
Right.
that quickly. And I said, you want to work? You want to do some freelancing? And, fast forward, 16, 17 years. I mean, he's a professional, and he's amazing, and he does. So that's one story. There are many more. Tahiti Spears, Morgan, who was working now for the, she's working for, I think, American Dental Association, I think. No, sorry, American Bar Association. She's one of their senior designers, and she does all these amazing publications. There's won awards, and, then you have Randy Williams, who's an industrial designer who came out of, Osmosis Camp. Lauren and Taylor Lenore, who are professional graphic designers now. So yeah, there's a big list of individuals who, and that's one of our rules when Osmosis. It's a kind rule where we say, look, as my mother mentioned to me when I first got into this, I was like, oh, baby girl, when I was little, I was like, I'm going to become a designer, and I'm going to buy you a house and dogs and whatever you want. She's, baby, I'm fine. I don't want all that. When, when you see a youngster that has that gleam in their eyes like you about creativity and design, and you pay it for it, you help them. And so, Osmosis mission is one that's culturally based, that has been passed on from a parent to a son, and to a group of like-minded citizens. I'm not the only one. Eric Bailey, Lisa Moran, like I said, it's a big bandwidth. It's not just, Vernon. There's a big group of us. We have a board and staff who are invested in this, who spent their lives pushing this mission as well. So yes, there's one of the things we're doing right now is we're going back and we're interviewing all these designers. Alan Davis, who's a designer. He works for the Black Ensemble Theater. So he's he's their designer now. He worked with Art on the Loose for a while, and he also was hired by Thirst. And Rick Valicente, and I give Rick a lot of credit because we did this big presentation on addressing the issues of not having designers of color in companies and firms. And Alan was like, I'm looking for work. I'm talented. And Rick with Thirst hired him on the spot. And so, and of course, that launched his career, And so by coming to an Osmosis event, so now Alan speaks and presents for Osmosis, and he works with kids. And so, so there's a big bandwidth of these individuals who we're now interviewing personally to talk about their own Osmosis experience. Because being around 20 years, we have now data and results.
Yeah.
Professionals. So I'm most proud of that. And I still get goosebumps when we go and do like an express yourself portrait, where we have kids do a portrait of themselves, and we ask them, what are they going to be when they grow up? Or what do they want to be? And we talk to them about design, and we'll tell them, did you know that everything in this room had to be designed? The world is designed by design. Like, what kind of designer did your shoes? What kind of designer did those light fixtures? What kind of designers do cars? Did you know that shoes and cars are both designed by an industrial designer, and they all have things in common? They're both built for shock absorption, color, lightweight, speed, comfort. So that's still I get the biggest high when I see those circuits come on. You talk to a youngster for the first time, and they go, wow, this is an actual thing, and I can create and I can design. And they pop their collar You know, you see a youngster go, I'm going to have my own company and da da da. You know, and we have youngsters that'll be at the Fuse conference that we're going to be speaking and interviewing with that are now a few in particular. One, Jarek Howard, who now has his own company called, and he's still in. He's about to go to college, his first year in college, but he already has a company called Humbly Arrogant that's doing well. So,
yeah, I was checking out the video on your website.
Yeah. So you know, that's kind of still the biggest to me is the I'm a what you call a in the trench person.
Yeah.
You know, so for me, it's still the biggest reward is seeing people who have this creative in them, this creative genius in them, actually getting the opportunity to live it. So that's the best high for me.
I mean, I'm getting goosebumps listening to you, Vernon. I mean, it's really amazing work. You know, I mean, you should be very proud of yourself. It's really wonderful. Yeah.
Very, very proud of you know, my heritage and where I'm from, and you know, I'm very humbled by all of this. You know, I recognize how fortunate. Well, I'm from St. Louis. I'm from the low end of St. Louis, and I was protected in many ways. You know, it was a very rough area growing up. You know, I saw people and colleagues and friends, many of who aren't here today. You know, and so for me personally, you know, it's a duty, it's a love duty, a loyal love, a responsibility that I have, that I welcome. But at the same time, I also recognize that it's not about, you know, Vernon or what I do, even as a designer. It's about this legacy and this history of a culture of what we do. So I'm just grateful to be able to do it, to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And probably more grateful to see that, you know, that it is making an impact. I think that's why when we come to this earth, we want to make sure that we left some kind of carbon impact, a positive impact. So,
you know, I mean, it's a perfect segue for my next question, because again, I know we're talking about Project Osmosis, but when I go to the website, I couldn't help but notice the Design Explorers initiative. And you know, I had an interview with Cheryl Miller. You know, and she this was a few weeks back, and she spoke to me all about kind of breaking ground as a young mixed race woman in the 80s. And we were talking all about that, but you know, and we live in I would definitely argue that the pendulum is swinging today. I mean, the dialogue is out there, the discussion is out there about race, about different cultures, and I think I would also argue we're running into some new challenges that we didn't have in the past.
Yes, agreed.
One of the things that specifically about Design Explorers is the focus on young men. And I was talking, it's funny because it never clicked with me until I had this discussion, but I was like 96 or so, that's when I got into jazz music. And before I was really into the jazz music, I was listening to, like, you know, popular music, and I was obsessed with Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, if you recall.
Yes.
And he wrote this song, All Apologies. And it was basically, you know, what else can I say? Everyone is gay. What else can I be? What else can I write? I don't have the right. What else can I be? All apologies. And this was like Generation X. This was, you know, how I'm growing up and realizing that there was just mass confusion about identity. So I was this white kid. I really related to this artist. And then he was, you know, he's strung out on heroin, and then he blows his own head off. And it really impacted me. Right?
Sure.
And I didn't realize till I'm talking to you, that's when I really jumped into jazz music. I just I shifted my interest. I started
Yeah.
identifying with something. I always played piano. That was my instrument. And then I just really started getting into jazz music. So like you talk about St. Louis, I know Miles Davis is from St. Louis, you know.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
But
Yes.
we talk about men specifically, I think, and there's no criticism towards women or feminism or anything.
Yeah.
I think um, sometimes we overlook how difficult it is for young men,
Yeah.
especially obviously in communities like the ones Design Explorers
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
is aimed at.
Yeah.
But this I finding my identity, and if you go through the statistics, most suicides committed by men, violent crimes committed by men,
Yeah.
prisons are filled with men.
Yeah.
The people who die in war are men,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we kind of we get kind of obsessed with this like patriarchal
Mm-hmm.
oppressive narrative. We kind of
Mm-hmm.
forget about the everyday guy,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
talking about fatherhood and being
Yeah.
a husband and being responsible.
Exactly.
This
Yeah.
epidemic, it's happening in white houses more and more now. It's like 25%.
Yeah.
It's gone up in white culture as well, that
Yeah.
there's fatherless homes.
Yes. Yes.
So when you're talking about culture and heritage and all of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I just find it very important that we preserve that history there.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think, uh, and yeah, I know you were asking, one of the questions I think is, does it have to be about design? These are issues that go beyond design. Again, they're the core, but design is connected to it because it's about identity, creative identity. And I think, to your point, when you look at, again, uh, for example, a young man of color, there's a very high percentage that his father's incarcerated,
Yeah,
or that he's not here at all. He's either, been shot, or he's been, you know, just since I've been in Chicago myself, I know of, I've had to even give eulogies, for young who've been killed and who've been, and so, yeah, it's an epidemic. It's a crisis. It's a shame. Um, but it's something that has to be addressed, and especially when you look at uh, uh, that without, again, you already have the issue that we talk about, color who looks like you, or the person who you have no point of reference, and like you said, you're traumatized. What you mentioned is trauma, about having that experience, and then this artist, and he blows his head off. But you a person a lot of times gets to that crossroad, and they have to make a decision. They're either going to um, fight it by doing something positive to show that, hey, look, I know this is what everybody's saying, but that rebrand thing I mentioned, but I'm going to rebrand myself. I'm not going to go by what everybody's saying, or this activity, or even the things around me. That's not going to define who and what I am. I'm going to rise above it. Or you're going to give into it, and it's going to consume you. And in many cases, our young people have been consumed by it because they don't see anything else.
right.
And, it's almost like, we've talked with young men, and like you said, with the Design Explorers program, we learned so much just talking to these young men about modern day experiences. And one of the things we do is we give them what we call a creative startup kit. And we let them, we don't let them, but they come up with their own ideas about creatively how to tackle something. Because me, 20 years ago, and when I'm coming up, the issues are totally different now. The
Yeah,
social media and all that stuff wasn't around.
right.
It was completely different. So what they face and how they address it is very different and very clever. But then to hear them present and talk about, well, I created this to solve this issue, it lets you know that they're thinking, and that again, that their ideas matter. And then, so the Explorers program, specifically with the summer program we had done last year, addressed this crisis. And we have some footage that we'll show at the conference, but it addressed the crisis of the maturation of a young man of color, to to creating a positive image of themselves despite the challenges that they face. And then also we've learned their responsibility. These have become sons and brothers and sisters for us, you know. So it requires a lot of labor and love and effort. But we also are looking with Osmosis. That's one of the things we're planning, is to find a actual home for Osmosis. Now, we've kind of been, up to this point, a bookmobile for design, where we kind of go from area to area and just talk about design and initiatives and share resources and materials and scholarships and things like that. But now we're at a stage where we recognize that we need to have a center, you know, a place where people can center, come in, be taught about design. Many young people don't know about design because their parents don't know about it. And so we'll talk to mothers and fathers about, well, this is my kid's drawing, I don't know what to do with them. There, you know, many cases in our community, a kid that's drawing and doodling on the table gets in trouble. They're considered a problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, why aren't you doing your math? And why aren't you doing your this? And it's like, well, they don't even realize that this is a creative person that they have. And so,
and they're thinking and they're solving their own problems. And
yeah, exactly.
You ever see that Far Side cartoon? It's art class, and the kids doing math problems, and the art teacher's like yelling at them.
Yeah, exactly. What are you doing? Yeah. So to your point, you know, which is why it gets stunted. You know, I know many adults today, you know, whose creativity has been stunted, and I see the adverse and negative effect that it's had on them, and you know, it hurts my heart, you know, because that's when I say nobody has the right to take creativity away from another person, you know. Right. And no one has the right to take that cultural experience away from them too. So that's what Osmosis is about. That's what the Design Explorers program for men focused on too, is really helping them to identify with the positive. You know, these negative things do exist, and we're not, you know, denying that. And we're not just trying to raise an army of designers of color either. What we're trying to do is raise conscious and raise creative conscious all over, you know. And we don't just serve, you know, some people think with Osmosis we only serve the Black population or the Black cause. We don't. We look at women in design, and because that's a very unrecognized, you know, field, a lot of very similar challenges. And so we really spend time focusing on a lot of the young ladies in our programs and things, and letting them know, look, you're pioneers in this. You're some of the first. You're you know, there are all kinds of opportunities, and we know, even though we live in this male-dominated society, and I know I'm a male, but look, these young ladies here and these other designers are professional. These women in design, they're powerful, they're strong, they look like, you know. So we recognize it's both. And so with those creative startup kits, we basically give them the kits, and they have these questions and things in them that ignites design, but we don't do it for them. We kind of let them, you know, you guys do your thing. And then when they come back and convene with us and show us the ideas and what they came up with, they're passionate about it. They're like, this is my thought. This is, and so our Design U Forum, similar to Explorers, that's what it does. We actually have that coming up March 28th and 29th. We work with UIC, and we actually get their whole campus. We're expecting about 120 students from Chicago, primarily from Chicago public schools.
Is it Julie's joining you?
Yes, Julie's joining us for that. And we're so excited because we have all these students, and they'll get resources about design. They'll get a resource kit. We partner with the universities, you know, to talk with them. And now universities are finding too that this is very, very fertile ground, creative ground where we're serving.
Well, you know, when you say you're trying to find a home for Osmosis, when you mentioned that earlier, the first thing I thought is, it sounds like you need to start a school.
Yeah. Well, and basically what we're learning is, and I would say even beyond school, we were thinking more of a center with programs and schools and all kinds of things, because it's so many pieces to this. Like, for example, we would have in there an exhibit gallery on Wimbush and Chuck, on Dr. Margaret Burroughs, so they can see when they come in, oh, we have a history on design here. So before they even start taking the classes and programs and stuff, they can see, oh, I have a rich history. then the other thing is programs that start, at the K5 level, K1 level, right? Where they can paint and draw, but also being in a, safe environment. So, we're looking at places off of Michigan on the south side for doing this. That's something I've been conversating with Julie and some other angel supporters about. So, it's a very, kind of aggressive thing. But to me, I'm a creative, I'm a dreamer. Sky's the limit. And I've seen the results. I've seen the results of putting this kind of work in and just staying on the mission, just being invested in it. So we look for like-minded citizens, the Adobes, the Microsofts out there, all the, there's very fertile ground here to invest in, which will ultimately sustain, not only this culture, but other cultures too. So.
That's fantastic. And yeah, I know Adobe's sponsoring some scholarships for some Osmosis students to attend Fuse, which is great.
Yes, we're so excited about that and grateful, and we in the Mac world and all that, we're designers, so we're in the design products, and we endorse the use of them because they're powerful tools of the trade. But we also want our young people to know that they can be creators in these companies too. We want them to feel like, I use this product, but my plan is to create a new product or to work with this company. So yeah, it's about vision, man. It's about vision.
Fantastic. So one last thing before we wrap up. You're talking about vision and creativity and that kid drawing in his math class or what have you, branding. It just, for me, growing up, like I was talking about, when you hit the age 13, it's like, I guess that's when I decided I wasn't going to be normal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When you're a creative person, you're kind of not normal. And the rest of the world looks at you like that. I think that's probably even harder for people, whose backgrounds are different as well. Mm-hmm. It's like double trouble there. Mm-hmm. But that therein lies, I think, the key, the strength, right? Is the creativity.
Yeah.
That's the motivation to hone that skill even more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So before we close, I wanted to ask you this. What's the ultimate success? I mean, if fast forward 50 years, 100 years, what's the ultimate, if Osmosis was the ultimate success, but beyond your wildest imagination, what would that look like?
I think beyond my wildest imagination, I would probably call it a Wakanda for design for people of color, where there's this big cultural community of all these, and, just like Star Trek and these movies in sci-fi world kind of were forerunners into, before cell phones were, it was Beam Me Up Scotty and a lot of these. Yeah. And now we look today and we have these actual tools of, air communication, as me and you are communicating through video stream right now and podcasts. I think the imagination of ultimate success for me is seeing a complete, inclusive, creative society. I believe in a creator. I believe that that's the creator's favorite pastime is creating things. When you think about creating the solar system and the moon and stars and all that, I think having individuals in a society or a citizenship where all are creative citizens, their work is respected in the sense that everybody can practice and can do it, but also having the ability to freely share those things and have access to tools and of the profession, and not seeing design as this elite profession only for a privileged few. I would love to see, fast forward, that design is used as a tool for changing our world, our planet, our ecosystem, addressing areas of pollution, addressing areas of family crisis, addressing design is design, and the world's designed by design. And so my vision is seeing a world that's wonderfully designed, that truly honors individuals like a Leroy Winbush and a Dr. Margaret Burroughs and a Chuck Harrison and Clement Mock and, you know, VSA and all these, you know, just amazing, you know, Dana Arnett. I mean, you have all these amazing designers. Here in Chicago, we have a strong design community, and we, you know, we all cross-pollinate. I actually have to call Justin with Earns with Rule 29 in a few minutes. But I don't think they just see me as this person of color that's doing design. They just see me as a designer, you know. And so that's the ultimate success, is just seeing other creatives having a curriculum that is globally inclusive for that, where a person can actually, you know, get involved and feel they can see parts of themselves before they even begin. They can see their own history and culture before they even begin the process. That starts at birth. So I would ultimately, in my wildest imagination, seeing a world that's completely accepting to creativity. There's an equalizing with men and women in design, where it's not just a male-dominated practice, but it's a practice that's based on your abilities and your humility, along with your creative talent. So that's it.
Well, I think we're going to end with that. Vernon Lockhart, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. I greatly appreciate you. And Daniel, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No, a great discussion.
Yeah, thank you, sir.